Many years ago, Princeton professor Agustín Fuentes was part of a team of researchers studying macaque monkeys living on the Rock of Gibraltar, a limestone mountain at the southern tip of Spain where sheer cliffs drop into the sea. The terrain was too rugged for the researchers to follow the nimble macaques around, so they fitted some of the monkeys with tiny cameras that would capture footage from their point of view. But when the researchers recovered the cameras, they found something they didn't expect.
As we're watching the footage from her perspective, we're seeing what she's seeing. She goes over the side of this cliff and is down on these rocks where we could never follow. And there's just this breathtaking vista from the southern part of the Rock of Gibraltar across the Straits of Gibraltar to Africa, right? It's this beautiful view. And she stops. And we're like, oh my God, what a great view. And she's just hanging out looking at it. And then she shifts slightly and frames probably the most beautiful image I've ever seen across the Straits of Gibraltar with Morocco, with Africa and the mountains of Africa in the distance. It is absolutely stunning. And then she just sits there and watches. Takes it all in. She doesn't nod off because the camera would move if she closed her eyes or moved down with her neck. She just checks it out. And we were all blown away. It was a transcendent moment of beauty. And we shared it with that monkey. One of the things that is deep, deep in our history is this ability to experience awe. This moment of knowing that there's more than just you in the world.
We can't know exactly what that monkey was thinking, but that moment feels undeniably familiar. When most of us see a brilliant rainbow after a threatening storm, hear a piece of music that deeply moves us, or enter a cathedral filled with beautiful art and a soaring ceiling, it can be awe-inspiring, make us feel wonder, and in truth, a little bit small, like there's something much bigger than us out there, like we're touching the sacred, however we define it. For Agustín, the idea that macaque might have been feeling a hint of awe too isn't just a neat moment of connection. It's a clue. As an evolutionary anthropologist, he sees the ability to be moved by something beyond the immediate demands of survival and feel connected to something larger than yourself as one of the earliest building blocks of belief. You see, for Agustín, belief isn't just a worldview or a set of values. It's a special power we have, one that evolved along with our brains.
Belief is the ability to draw on the range of cognitive and social resources, our histories and experiences, and combine them with imagination.
In other words, belief allows us to take what we've seen, heard, and learned and change it in our mind's eye. By pondering it, combining what we already know with what could be, we can create something entirely new.
It could be an idea, a vision, something we need, a possibility, but that something doesn't have to be immediately present to our senses. And once we believe in it, we invest wholly and authentically in that something so that it becomes our own reality. That capacity is a game changer because it allowed our ancestors to do new things in the world and to change stuff in ways that nothing else can or has.
The ability to believe is at the core of what makes us human. It's what enables us to commit to shared goals, invent new objects and ways of being, and ultimately, to reshape ourselves and the world around us. It's also the foundation for how we make sense of that world and our place in it. And as such, it's the foundation of religion. But how did we get from simple feelings of awe and wonder to the kinds of complex practices and beliefs we see and face around the world today? On this episode, we're going to talk with Agustín about just that. He's the author of the book Why We Believe, which traces our capacity to believe from its earliest glimmers millions of years ago in our primate ancestors to our modern 21st century selves. We'll also explore how and why belief, religious and otherwise, has been and continues to be one of the most powerful forces shaping human existence. I'm Dave DeSteno, and this is How God Works.
Let's go back 20 or 30 million years when we last shared an ancestor with a bunch of other monkey-like things, right, primates. Because understanding the things that are similar across, let's say, monkeys, chimpanzees, gorillas, humans, orangutans, gibbons, a variety of different primates, shows us sort of like what we have to work with. So when humans emerged from this branch of primates and started their own trajectory, there was stuff that was already there.
So what exactly was already there? According to Agustín, there were two key factors that helped set primates up for belief.
We all start with a shared capacity visually, right? The way our eyes work, the color visions, the two eyes in the front of the head, seeing good depth 3D overview, plus being really, really social. Like for primates, the name of the game is relating to other primates, and that's how you work in the world, socially. Those things come together and provide a template in the mind of the organism for the ability to take in and experience more than just the exact moment. Because you're remembering about all the relationships you have, you're remembering all the different kinds of food you've eaten, you're remembering what your landscape is, and all those things come together and open up, let's say, a window, a biological window for an experience that's a little bit more than all those things combined. And that initial capacity then, way down the road, becomes incorporated in these other kinds of changes to our brains and our bodies and our lives that facilitate the emergence of this stuff we're going to call belief. But that baseline in primates, the capacity to put together these visual, sensory, cognitive, and social experiences and have them basically blow us away, that is a really important starting point.
This particular way of weaving together sensory and social experiences to think beyond what's in front of you is something we all share as primates. But to see how those early capacities evolved into something even more complex, something that looked more like us, we have to climb to the next offshoot in our family tree.
The hominins are a branch that split off of the wide range of African apes, this big branch that over the last 6, 7, 8 million years diversified around Africa and eventually outside of the continent of Africa into a variety of lineages, of which the only remaining lineage is us, Homo sapiens. But the hominins are very important because it's understanding the changes we can see in their bodies and the way that they lived that helps us understand the patterns that we can see in our own selves today.
Like what? What defined hominins as separate from the primates that came before?
Bipedality. That is standing up on two limbs, your hind limbs, and moving that way preferentially. Now, I think this is interesting because most people think basically that happens when a bunch of apes fell out of the trees and started walking on the ground. That's not the way it happened. The biology, the way our hips and legs and upper body is shaped, right, that facilitates bipedality, that allows us to walk on two legs effectively, that actually emerged from things moving on top of branches and stuff like that. What that does is it changes both the upper and lower body. It changes your perspective, and it also changes the way in which you move around the world.
In other words, not only are ancient hominin bodies starting to look more like ours, they're starting to do and see things more like us too. Just picture for a second what the world looks like when you spend most of your time on all fours. That's quite a lot of looking at the branches or ground you're on. But when you're on 2 feet, whole new vistas open up. You're seeing more of your surroundings, maybe looking into the distance. Oh, and look at that. Now your upper limbs are freed up. You can carry more stuff around with you too. That opens up a world of possibilities.
By about 5 to 6 million years ago, those things that could be bipedal in different contexts started spending more and more time on the ground and then doing a wide variety of things on the ground, moving on 2 legs, that changed the way we lived in the world. Basically, it changed what's called our niche, the way in which human ancestors made a living in the world.
When scientists talk about a niche, they're not just talking about an organism's habitat. It's more like the full range of ways a species interacts with the world. For hominins, standing upright didn't just shift their perspective. It radically expanded their niche, where they could go, what kind of food they could access, how they connected and cooperated with each other. It also allowed them to start shaping the world around them in ways no animal ever had before.
Most organisms live in the world, and they're challenged by the world, and they push back, and they change the world a little bit. They change their niche slightly. Humans, interestingly, can imagine not just a slight alteration of their niche, but whole new ways to be and make that happen. And that is tied directly into belief. Stone tools are a great example. So I frequently hold up what's called an Oldowan stone tool. It's an old, very simple, 2.5 million year old stone tool that's sort of a rock with some flakes knocked off of it to create a sharp edge. And when I do this for audiences or students, people are like, it's a sharp rock, big deal. But then you have to realize nothing else in the history of this planet has ever taken a rock, which is one of the hardest substances known, looked at that rock, recognized that you could manipulate that rock to create a new thing, to do something totally new. So this capacity to imagine different outcomes, to make those happen, and then, here's the kicker, to teach others in your group how to do those things, that sets the stage for mind and body processes by which belief becomes powerful. To imagine something, to make it happen, and to share that result widely so that it continues to happen.
The thing is, when you imagine something like a tool and then turn it into reality, you're not just making an object. You're reshaping your way of life, your niche. You have access to things you didn't before. And once your niche changes, it changes you in return, introducing new challenges that spark new ideas and beliefs, leading to even more innovations that push the cycle forward. By becoming niche builders, humans set off a kind of feedback loop, one that's still going strong today. And the moment that loop really kicked into gear was around 2 to 3 million years ago, when a new branch of our evolutionary family tree emerged, genus Homo, the lineage that would lead to us.
With the genus Homo, we see a ratcheting up of the complexity in the way in which Homo is modifying their niche, changing the materials outside of just their bodies. But we also see critical differences in the bodies. So we start to see some particular structures in the hands and in the heads, slightly bigger brains, more complex hands than in earlier hominins that suggest different changes in our brains and bodies, the way they're working together.
And what happens when you combine a body built for precision work with growing brain power to fuel the imagination? You guessed it, a whole new level of tools.
What's really incredible is by 1.5 or 1.4 million years ago, they're making these kinds of tools we call Acheulean tools, and a few others, that are really hard to make. You take a rock and you have to do tons and tons and tons of modifications to that rock to create sometimes a teardrop-shaped point or different kinds of flakes or different kinds of edges. And what's really amazing are two things. One, these tools are frequently overworked. That is, they're worked way more than is necessary for them to be effective at cutting or chopping or hitting something. And two, they are aesthetically beautiful. You and I today will find these things aesthetically beautiful, and we know that the visual systems 1.5 million years ago were pretty much the same as they are today. So we know that not only were our ancestors imagining new possibilities and creating them out of the hardest substance, out of stones, but they were doing so in a way that was aesthetically pleasing, and they frequently did way more of this than they needed to. There are piles at 500,000 or 800,000 years ago, piles of these stone tools littered across different parts of the world where our ancestors did a ton of work, really worked hard to make these beautiful things, and then left them in piles around without ever using them.
Which is something that I find fascinating because I think every evolutionary biologist will tell you effort is metabolically costly, right? And if I could create something that gets the job done, that should be good enough unless I'm getting some other satisfaction or meaning from that extra work, right?
Yeah. And that's exactly what's going on. We think that stone tool making sets the stage for sort of aesthetic beauty, a kind of social connection, and that these are not just tools in the sense of chopping something or cutting something or doing something else with them, building something. They're also expressions of identity, of communication, of belonging and of being. And once you start to see that, that opens the door for a wide variety of other things that our human ancestors made that aren't tools at all, but are actually directly tied to the emergence of belief.
In other words, tool-making was just one piece of the puzzle.
So during this time that all this tool stuff is going on that we've been talking about, the members of genus Homo aren't just like living in groups, making tools and eating stuff. They're doing a wide variety of other things. They are, for example, for at least the last million, maybe 1.5 million years, doing something called cooperative caretaking. That is, their raising of young is not just about the mom taking care of the young, or the mom and maybe the dad or one other individual or a few other individuals. They're about whole groups, intensively focusing on the young, creating a space where the young are completely enveloped in a social context which allows the young to grow slower and is correlated with the growth of a much larger, much more complex brain. So this cooperative parenting sets the stage, right, for kind of social relations and cooperation that slows down how humans grow, human ancestors and eventually humans, and opens us up to more sort of learning about the world. At the same time, we're also seeing incredible evidence of the use of fire. At least by 500,000 years ago, most likely by 1 million years ago, human ancestors were creating and building fires, which did 3 things. One, it allowed them to modify food and stones and wood in ways to expand the way they create things or make things out of them and eat different kinds of food. 2, it took them out of the daylight-nighttime cycle. That is, our ancestors began to be able to do stuff at night without having biological adaptations to vision or things like that. And 3, it allowed them to explore new areas, whether that be caves or colder climates or what have you.
With fire, early humans gained more than just warmth and cooked food. They gained time. Even after the daylight disappeared, they could gather in the fire's glow, watching the flames flicker and cast shadows into the dark. Fire extended the limits of perception, creating time and space for new thoughts, maybe even new questions. And in a species where the most important thing is relationships, odds are one of the first things people will start to wonder about is what happens to those relationships when their loved ones die.
One thing that is characteristic of all humans living today is that when people die, we do stuff. Right? We commemorate those deaths. We recognize them. We treat the bodies in certain ways. So this behavior, which is called funerary behavior and mortuary behavior, right? This sort of recognition of death and then doing something for and with the bodies of those who are dead to commemorate them and think about them is just across all humans. We thought, researchers, scientists, that this shows up very recent with humans that are just like us. So not deep in time.
But in the last couple decades, new discoveries have started to change that narrative. Archaeologists have found evidence of mortuary behavior that not only dates back to much earlier than we thought, it actually extends farther out on our family tree, too. One of the most striking examples was discovered in 2013, deep inside South Africa's Rising Star cave system, where distant cousins of ours, known as Homo naledi, were carefully placing their dead as far back as 200,000 to 300,000 years ago.
So Homo naledi is a lot like us. Their brains are a lot smaller, but some of the front part of their brains, the frontal lobes and other things are similar to ours. They had probably very complex social behavior. Their bodies were smaller than ours and slimmer, so they're really good at moving through caves. What naledi did for their dead was to pick them up from the surface and to together work to take those bodies deep, deep, deep into these cave systems, to place them in very specific places, not just anywhere, but very specific places, and to commemorate that. That suggests to me, and to many scholars, that Homo naledi must have had some recognition of death and some beliefs about the right thing to do with the dead.
For researchers, this discovery was unexpected. Until recently, burial practices were thought to be unique to larger-brained species like Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. Yet here was a smaller-brained species doing something remarkably similar with its dead. And what made it even more striking was where the bodies were being taken.
This chamber called the Dina Naledi subsystem, where we found many of the bodies of Homo naledi, is more than 80 feet below the ground, over 100 feet down into the caves. And I've been there. To get in there takes a long time. It is very difficult. It is completely dark. There's no light. There's no access to anything. And it involves squeezing and turning and pushing yourself and really risking life and limb. And what's amazing about this site, in this Dina Naledi chamber, there is nothing else but Naledi. There's not other animals in there. There's not a whole bunch of other things. There's not evidence of people using that. It is just a very hard to get to place where Homo Dina Naledi, 250,000 years ago, brought their dead and left them there.
That's what makes this site so remarkable. Homo naledi subjected themselves to huge physical strain for no material reward, working in groups to carry bodies, lighting fires along the way so they could see where they were going, all so they could carefully place their dead in this hidden space, deliberately selected for this sole purpose.
It's tight and it is really hard to get to, and you have to move through spaces that are often less than, 20 inches or 15 inches wide. You're halfway upside down, and imagine dragging a body into these things. But when you get into the space, it opens up a little. The ceilings are sort of high with all of these sort of incredible stalactites and stalagmites around. There's this incredible sense of quiet, darkness, and profound sense of place. This is a very amazing place. And they left the bodies there, right? And they did this multiple times. So it's impossible to know what exactly Naledi was thinking or felt or believing that led to this. But being a human being, we can sense that it meant a lot. It was really important to them. And it clearly was associated with some kind of commitment about how to treat your kin, your friends, your loved ones, because there's more than just the body and the things you can touch in the world.
This is one of the earliest hints we have of something like a ritual around death. And while that doesn't mean Homo naledi necessarily had anything like what we'd call religious beliefs, it does suggest they saw death as significant and worth marking, a trait we share. When our own species emerged around 300,000 to 400,000 years ago, we were very much not alone or unique. There were lots of other human relatives, roaming around in groups, making beautiful tools, maybe starting to experiment with ritualized behaviors, even creating symbols.
What's really interesting is around this time, we see lots of evidence of meaning making. We see evidence of art. We see evidence of things that people would call symbols. We see more and more complexity in social organization and the way in which things are living. But over that last 300,000 years, especially in the last 50 or 60,000 years, it's us, humans, our specific lineage that triples, quadruples down on the production of meaning-laden items, on moving around the planet, on doing more and more complicated things that stands out. And so there is something about Homo sapiens, about us, that invests more in making meaning in the world, in modifying these niches more and more and more, that stands out and has probably got us to where we are today. So humans are distinctive. We're not unique, but we are definitely distinctive in that realm.
This inclination toward meaning-making could have taken Homo sapiens in lots of directions. So how exactly did it nudge us toward our unique forms of belief today? According to Agustín, one of the first big steps came when we started to make some furry new friends.
Humans and dogs, or wolves at the time, started entering into relationships and co-shaped one another's bodies and minds, opening up new ways to relate. So humans began to see other animals in different ways. So domestication is not just about humans and dogs, it's humans and horses, humans and bovids, right? Cows, goats, sheep, humans and llamas and alpacas. these relationships between humans and other animals changed not only the way we eat or the way we clothe ourselves or the kinds of housing that we have to construct. It also changed what diseases we get, and it changed how we see the world of relations. It expanded out the kinds of family, right? The kinds of kin that we can make. So domestication shifted the ways in which humans relate to the world, expanding the niche.
Given the importance of these new relationships, it's probably not a coincidence that so many of the oldest religions we have records for had spiritual beliefs centering on animals like dogs, bulls, or horses.
We see many successful ways to be human, but those different ways, the different structures they live in, the different animals they interact with, the different economic or political systems they live in, shape the way in which they perceive the world, imagine the world, and therefore that shapes the way they believe.
And of course, each of these changes brought more changes. Once humans started getting regular food from domesticated animals, and eventually plants, they faced a whole new set of choices.
So imagine a scenario, right, over the last 10,000 years where we follow different groups of humans. And what we see is that different groups of humans are still moving around, foraging across the landscape. Other groups are settling down, staying in one place and building buildings, maybe building corrals for the animals they've domesticated, maybe even building these containers where they store the milk or the fur or the fat from animals. So now they have places where they are year-round. That means they invest differently in that place. And they have this thing called storage, where before you would have food and then you wouldn't have food and you go get more food and bring that back. But now you have surplus food. You have grains. You have things that other people don't have. And maybe within the group, you start to see differentiation and some people control the things and distribute it to the others. So we start to see social inequality and power. If you are a human in these different contexts, the way you live in the world, what you see is going to shape the way in which you perceive and believe about the world. If you are moving around in small bands, right, moving from place to place as the animals move or as the temperatures change, you're going to have one way of thinking about the world. If you live in a city or a town and you're tasked with tending sheep and that you have to go to markets to exchange your sheep wool for grains to then eat, the very structure, the very perception of your niche, of the way we make a living in the world, is going to impact the way in which you believe.
It's one reason why nomads and hunter-gatherers, who accumulate less, tend to be more egalitarian and animistic in their spiritual beliefs. While on the other hand, some of the earliest religious texts we have from societies that settled and grew around agriculture tend to focus more on things like hierarchy and proper behavior.
As people's lives become more complex in the sense of economic, political, domestication, dietary relationships, right? As these structures of storage and buildings and animal relations, politics and economics expand, what we see is it's harder to keep people together. It's harder to sort of explain the world and coordinate things. And so I think the emergence of explanations, of rules, of understandings, forms an incredible cohering power, right? Religion emerges in the way we think about it, these contemporary institutional religions, emerges in these centers where lots of people are living complicated lives and doing stuff and need to be together. And religion binds us stronger than anything else. Religion, in the contemporary sense, institutionalized structures and theologies, gives humans an explanation, a connection, and coordinates how we believe.
So if I'm hearing you right, then the capacity for belief can be leveraged for good or for bad in some senses, right? That is, it can lead to inequality. It can lead to certain classes having more power than others. And I know for religion, there are these multiple layers. There is belief about the biggest questions, about what does it mean to live a good life? What happens after death? What are these transcendent experiences? But there are also beliefs about the way society should be structured. Which sex does what? Who deserves what? And so how do you see the special type of belief that we refer to as religious belief coming about, and what role do you see that playing?
Well, I like to make a distinction between religiousness, that is the human capacity or tendency to engage in religious belief and practice, and religion, which are the institutions, the structures with histories and theologies that we think about when we say religion. So I would like to suggest, and I think the evidence is really strong, that religiousness, this capacity to imbue the world with meaning, to see more than the here and now, to use that to bring us together, what many people might call spirituality or something like that, there's good evidence that's old, very old. But if you look around the world, all of the things we call religion today, those are relatively new. Right, the institutions, the Abrahamic traditions, Buddhist traditions, Hindu traditions, a variety of other animistic traditions, all of those are reasonably new, thousands of years. So what I like to do is talk about human capacities of religiousness and where belief plays in that, but also then to talk about religions and theologies and to see how religions, institutions, and structures take this capacity for belief and form it, mold it, and shape it in particular ways. And that gets at what you just said. There's this broader belief, this sort of sense of knowing that there is more than the here and now. But then there's also those who say, okay, well, here's the way that's ordered, or here's the way that's structured, and here's how you do that right, and here's how you do that wrong. And there's where we get into, I think, some of the real complexities and why I say belief is the most amazing and the worst thing that humans evolved.
What does that then portend, given that things keep changing and there's a rising secularization going on right now? And so we are casting off part of that institution. And Lord knows there are failings in those institutions, so I'm not here defending them. But they did provide third spaces for people to come together and ways to think about things. Do you have any concerns about the direction we're heading?
Yeah, but I'm going to change the conversation because people say secularism. People are all worried about people leaving the contemporary institutions. But this is the way it's always happened. People shift from certain institutions or systems to others, from certain belief traditions to other belief traditions. And so people say, as people leave, let's say, the Catholic Church or Christianity or Judaism or Islam or what have you, these Abrahamic traditions, they're like becoming secular. These people have not lost their religiousness. They have not lost their capacity to experience transcendence, their deep commitment to more than the here and the now. What they are is being disillusioned or being left out of certain institutions. New institutions will emerge. New religious traditions will emerge. I am not worried that humans are going to become boring automatons who don't believe in anything more than the here and the now. That's pretty much impossible given the human niche.
And what is knowing the history of how all that came about? How does that help us thinking about where we're headed?
It's really clear and really easy right now to be very pessimistic about the human species and about the state of the planet. And you can blame politics, economics, religious organizations, a variety of other things. But what's really important is if you know our history, if you know what human evolution looks like, if you know all the patterns across time of our bodies and minds and experiences, you see this as an ongoing process. And you're filled with hope and optimism and enchantment for human capacities and possibilities. I'm not saying it's all going to work out, but I am saying we have the capacity to believe in better futures and make them happen.
Next time on How God Works, as the latest wellness trends embrace intermittent fasting, people are reevaluating the health benefits of going periods of time without eating. But as it turns out, the benefits of fasting can go far beyond quick weight loss and mental clarity. From Yom Kippur to Lent to the month-long fast of Ramadan, we'll explore how religious fasting isn't just about self-denial, but also self-exploration.
The challenge of Ramadan is not avoiding the food and drink and beverage. It's the unavoidability of the self that you're faced with.
And we'll hear some new research showing how even one day of religious fasting can deepen people's spiritual commitment, connection, and well-being over the long term. That's next time on How God Works. How God Works is hosted by me, Dave DeSteno. This episode was written by Sophie Eisenberg and me. Our senior producer is Josie Holtzman. Our producer is Sophie Eisenberg. Our associate producer is Emmanuel Desarme. Executive producer is Genevieve Sponsler. Merritt Jacob is our mix engineer and composed our theme, which was arranged by Chloe DeSteno. The executive producer of PRX Productions is Jocelyn Gonzalez. This podcast was also made possible with support from the John Templeton Foundation. To learn more about the show and access episode transcripts, you can find our website at howgodworks, all one word, .org. And for news and peeks at what's coming, feel free to follow us on Instagram at howgodworkspod, or me on Blue Sky at David DeSteno.